Welcome to the third and final video in my series on how to create a woodblock print. If you're following along with the tutorial, at this point you should be done carving your blocks. Just like video number 2, I want to start by giving you a list of the materials that you're going to need for part 3. Before I get into that, I do want to say that there's a lot of ways to get into printing. For example, you can print with paper moist or dry, and in this video I'm going to show you how I like to moisten my paper. However, I've found that you really can do dry paper, especially when it's a simpler print and when you're just starting. I think as you go on further, you'll realize that something like moistening the paper becomes more important, but again, you don't have to follow this video exactly. I think that this would be a good guideline for someone who wants to try it out, but please experiment and see what works. But anyway, here are the materials for the method that I'm going to show you. First, you'll need some newspaper. I don't have any on hand, but any kind of newspaper should do. You also need a sheet of wax paper. Just one sheet will do. Some dishes. I like to use these shallow glass ones, but any kind of small cup or ceramic dish, anything will work. A spray bottle of any type as well. You could use an old one, just fill it with water. That's all you'll need. 2 large Ziploc bags. Pretty much the larger the better, but depends on your print size. You might need a very small one if you're making a small print. And then to talk about the color we're going to use, I prefer to use watercolor inks. And I think this is the easiest way to go about it. So I buy these tubes of watercolor, which are very affordable. These are Artist Loft, pretty cheap tubes, but I haven't found it makes a difference between type. And you'll just want to buy whichever colors you think you'll want for your print. You can also mix them up. I usually mix a couple colors and try to achieve what I'm looking for, but I found that's the best way. And finally, you'll need some paper to print on. I use this Japanese paper from Awagami, but I think there's many options. There's lots of Western papers that could work, and I just recommend experimenting, trying some different ones out. But I think you would want to use something a little thicker than printer paper for this part, because that printer paper will probably warp and mess up your prints a little bit as you go. It's not durable enough for this process. So I would recommend trying a few out. I've tried maybe 4 or 5 different papers, and they all have different results, but they're good in their own ways. So that's everything that you'll want for this method of printing. Now let's get into the preparation. The first thing I've done is cut my sheets down to the right size. This time I'm only using 4 sheets for the purpose of this video, but I think this actually came back to bite me, which I'll explain later. All of this preparation is being done a day in advance. The first thing is to moisten your newspaper. You shouldn't be soaking anything, but you'll want it to be cool to the touch. I will say it's very difficult to describe the level of moisture you'll need, and I still mess it up, as you'll see in this video. But in general, you'll get better over time and become more consistent, knowing what you'll need. You'll want to sandwich the paper in between the newspaper layers. So right now I'm laying down each sheet of printing paper and spraying them lightly. Now I have to admit that I way over moistened my paper, and it showed up in the final prints. Since this is just a tutorial, it's no big deal, and I want to make another video where I document the making of this print, and that time I hope to get it better. Once your pack is ready, you'll want to add it to the Ziploc bag. This will help retain the moisture overnight as it spreads out evenly throughout the paper. You can see I added more water here, which is part of my mistake that I described earlier. So anyway, now you want to put some weight on top of it. Just something that will apply even pressure overnight. The next day when you're ready to print, unload the sheets of paper from the bag. You'll want to spread the sheets out a little bit just to let them relax, and then put them in another Ziploc bag and seal it. Now you'll see I set that bag aside and I just set up my printing station. So you'll see me laying out everything that I'll need. One of these dishes is just full of water and the other one will have the colors when I'm printing. The jar at the top is full of rice paste, but this time you'll want to water it down a little bit. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I also mix my colors with Sumi ink sometimes. Now your workstation is all set up, so it's time to print. I took a lot of footage here, so I'm just going to let it roll and I'll talk about different aspects throughout the process. So here we go. The first thing is to make your color. This first impression is just a gray, so I'm mixing water with a little bit of Sumi ink because it's pretty strong. Before taking any impressions, you always need to moisturize the block. Add a good amount of water to the block with your brush. You should let it soak for maybe 5 or 10 minutes and add more if you see it soaking in. Now for your first impression. You want to add your color to the block and rice paste. If it's a large area, use more rice paste because it'll help you achieve a smooth color area. Then, you'll want to use your brush to spread everything evenly around. Once I think everything's thoroughly mixed, I like to gently and lightly rub my brush over the surface of the block. I try to even out all the paste and pigment so it's a very smooth impression. I think one of the hardest parts of the printing process is managing the amount of paste and pigment you'll have to use on each impression. This is something that you'll really just have to get a feel for over time. Now take your first sheet out of the bag and gently set it into the registration marks. Here you can really see how over moisturized my paper is. The wax paper will allow your rubbing tool to fly over the surface without ripping up the paper. It's best to use very small and quick circles when you're doing the rubbing. Finally, when you pull the impression, move it to the next bag. You'll want to finish every sheet before moving on to the next color. This impression is a darker gray, so I just added a little more Sumi ink to the same bowl. Now it's time for the first color impression, so I'm using one of the watercolor tubes. This impression is also a gradient or a bokashi. The way I achieve this is adding pigment onto one side of the brush and then repeatedly going back and forth to slowly drag that color down. Just like all the other impressions, it's very important that the whole block is moisturized when doing this. One comment here is that for wider color areas, you'll always need to use more pressure and more time on the rubbing in order to get a smooth transfer. In order to save some time, I did a double impression on this one. So there's a dark blue bokashi at the top, and I also did the brown tree at the bottom. I just made 2 pigment bowls and used 2 brushes in order to do this. One result of the over moisturized paper I'm using is that the impressions are coming out a little bit blurry. The colors are tending to run a little bit, so the overall result is kind of a muddy looking print. Another thing is that in general, your prints will probably get better over time. As the blocks become more saturated with water and pigment, they just tend to work better. So in general, you'll want to do batches that are much larger than 4 sheets. Like I would probably recommend somewhere between at least 10 to 15 because the first 4 to 5 will probably be more of warm-up prints. My last impression is the key block, so I'm using pretty much pure sumi here. And I generally do this last because I want to keep those key lines really sharp. If you have a dark keyline impression like this, you'll want to be really careful on this layer. Any stray pigment on the print will show up very obviously. And there's your last impression. So now the prints are all done, but they're still moist. So now it's time to dry them out. I forgot to mention this in the materials section, but ideally you'll want some kind of cardboard or particle board to dry these out. Just layer the prints between whatever you find, and then you're going to put some weight on top and let it sit for a couple days. If you don't do this step, your prints will most likely curl up as they dry in the air. 2 to 3 days later, and your print should be dry and flat. This is the end of my printmaking process. And there we go, your prints are now complete and dry. I think at this point, if you followed along, you'll be pretty rewarded with the process. There's a lot of steps and a lot of things that you can improve on in the future, but just seeing your first prints is always the best feeling in the world. I really hope that if you tried it out, that you enjoyed the process and you want to try more in the future. I think it's a really fun thing to slowly and incrementally improve, and you can never run out of things that you need to work on. So it's cool in that way. There's a lot of aspects to it. I hope that I did a good job of explaining lots of the parts in this process, but please send me a message or leave me a comment if you have any questions. And whether or not you are making your first print, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed the production.